My tag date came and went. I should have been home, but I was still in solitary confinement after more than 5 months, let alone 72 hours. Eventually, my family managed to get a great lawyer, a woman from a firm called the Stokoe Partnership in Manchester. It was only when she threatened them with a judicial review, citing multiple human rights violations, that they gave me the tag and sent me home the next day. The governor of the Nick could be found personally liable for maltreatment of a prisoner. It took that threat to get me and a semblance of justice. At that point, however, the state was cranking the pressure up from all angles. My passport offence had been turned into a nightmare of solitary confinement, but other things were now coming to head. Not only had the police not finished with me, they had barely started. We owned 7 properties at the time of EDL started. 1 was in my name, and 6 were in my wife's. These old credit problems of mine made it easier just to do the paperwork through her name. When her brother wanted to buy a house, eventually I got on the property ladder. It was an £80,000 property, and I lent little Stevie the 20k that he needed for a deposit. He's like a younger brother to me. I also introduced him to my mortgage advisor, who arranged our legitimate loans. That was in 2006. He bought the house, sold it 6 months later, and made a profit of 30k. The problem being that he overstated his earnings on the application. He sold it to a bloke who also bought it on a self-certification mortgage that he shouldn't have had, strictly speaking. But like I said, everyone was doing fine at the time, and it didn't seem a big deal. This was before the financial market went tits up a couple of years later, but that wasn't any of my business. I got my 20k back, and that was all. No one lost any money at any stage. What made me feel really bad was that the mortgage advisor got 18 months jail as well. She wasn't in great health either, but in order to nail me, the main point of the exercise, the police had to crack down on her too for facilitating it. The police must have spent hundreds of thousands of pounds trying to build a tax case against me. Then, seeing their 30 or so charges all whittled away one by one until finally they played their trump card. They were going to nail my wife over the taxes, a woman who knew nothing about our finances, unless I took the blame on myself. They were going to get Tommy Robinson once and for all, through the blameless woman, put her face and name in the public domain, destroy any hope of my family had of living a normal life. They poured all over the resources into trying to nail me, and they had to have someone to show for it. My wife and kids. Collateral damage, nothing more. Initially, I was potentially looking to 3 to 5 years in jail, although I'd only lent her brother that 20 grand as part of the overall case involving that mortgage advisor. My cousin was being prosecuted, and the sum involved in her self-cert mortgage was $375,000. The police wanted to tie me into that, which was bullshit, but that would have raised the combined value of the properties involved in the case over a nominal $500,000 threshold, which made it more serious, hence the possibility of 3 to 5 years. My wife insisted that I wasn't to plead guilty to that, whatever it meant to her and the family. This was 2013. I had finished the passport sentence, and I was pretty much convinced in my own mind that I was quitting EDL, but I was still messed up. My mum was having serious health issues with aggressive form of cancer, and on her first day of chemotherapy, I was on the piss. I was supposed to take her to chemo at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I got home at 8:30 a.m, still drunk. Dad took a day off work and took her instead, and I felt shit, a complete scumbag. What good reason? Because I was being one. I knew what they were doing, using my family to get to me. But I just wasn't coping. I also knew deep down they were going to offer me some kind of deal, and that I'd have to take it. The deal originally was that I took responsibility for the lot, and in return, everyone else would walk. The brother-in-law, cousin, and a mate of mine. Gooders, who, like me, had just lent some money. He lived in Thailand, and they kept having him fly all the way back to answer bail. About half a dozen times. He was pissed off, and rightly so. poor gooders even got refused service by a Muslim member of staff when he went to Selfridges with me, although the management gave us a free meal by way of apology. But if I pleaded guilty, they all walked. The bottom line was that I was going to jail, and all I could think of was that my mum was going to die. All she would say was that she wanted to know her grandchildren were all right, that everyone was going to be okay. So I didn't want to be in jail when she was dying. I was a mess, so I went to see Kev and told him that was it. I'd had enough. I'd already met the guys from the counter-extreme group of the Quilliam Foundation during the filming of the documentary When Tommy Met Mo, and Majid Nawaz had told me to get in touch if ever I was considering leaving the EDL. Majid saw the publicity opportunity for Quilliam. If they could take the credit for Tommy Robinson quitting, we met and talked things through. In return for me throwing my hat in with them, they agreed to pay the family bills if I was sent down. I'll come to my final days in the EDL shortly, but it was October 2003. I was at my wit's end and the trial was looming in January. I had to go. That was the first time in 5 years I put my family before the EDL, but I thought that if Mum died while I was inside, she would at least have seen that I was leaving the EDL, that I was finally ticking the right boxes, getting my priorities right, as things were playing out. I still intended pleading not guilty to the bigger charge, and the jury was actually sworn in before we did the deal. It was interesting that in St Albans, a town within 2% Muslim population, they managed to select a jury with 25% Muslims, plus a community police officer for good measure. Nothing like stacking the odds. I was relying on the fact that if I got off, the authorities would be left looking completely stupid because they'd spent 5 years on this witch hunt. The chance of me being found not guilty wasn't a realistic option for them. Just before the trial started, they offered to reduce the case against me to my brother-in-law's initial property deal. At that level, my solicitor said the sentencing guidelines indicated a suspended sentence. Not that that was necessarily what Tommy Robinson would get. I said I'd take it if they agreed to me having no financial benefit, meaning if they admitted that I didn't gain anything from the transaction, so they couldn't have come after me on a criminal proceedings charge. They said they had no intention of doing that, so I agreed, for my wife's sake. In court, when I pleaded guilty, the judge received a letter from the Archbishop of Canterbury's office asking for leniency, while Usma Hussain from Quilliam came to the court in person and pleaded on my behalf. And so the judge whacked me with an 18-month prison sentence. Anyway, smells a little fishy to me, Your Honour. I've since checked other cases, similar cases, and many a lot worse. No one gets 18 months for that stuff, but I did. While I was in jail, Mum had a 12-hour operation. We didn't know if she was going to survive or be able to walk again if she pulled through, which was only 50-50. I was sitting in Winchester jail waiting for the chaplain to come and tell me whether my mum had made it or not. I had so many regrets for how I'd been as a son, what I'd put her through, not just what I'd done, but the way I'd been, a complete arsehole. Even then, I was selfishly thinking of myself, I suppose, feeling sorry for myself, but I couldn't face it all. The hours pressed, evening came, and I guess the chaplain went home without receiving word, and I was crying for my mum. For myself, I couldn't sleep a wink. The next morning, the little cell window opened up, and the chaplain said, "Your mum's all right." I still didn't see her through the whole sentence because she was so ill, but she was still with us. That was all that mattered. I still had some way to go before I was out of the woods with the law, but I was clean of the booze and lifestyle of the EDL, and most importantly of all, my mum was still with us. Then, when I came out of HMP Winchester on licence and got home to my family, the police changed their mind over our plea agreement and said they would pursue me for the £315,000 proceeds of crime as well. That's what they estimated our total assets were worth, because I'd lent my brother-in-law £20,000. The police said every penny we'd ever earned, saved or accumulated was the proceeds of crime, and they wanted it. Why? Because the vindictive bastards could. That's why. That's an absolute piss take.